As I mentioned before, it's difficult when you cover the nervous system to know exactly where to start. I mentioned that some books start at the brain and work their way down, and others start with the neuron and work their way up. I started at the spinal cord. We looked at the basic cell of the nervous system, the neuron, and then we looked at how neurons had the dendrites and the axons, and the axons could bundle together to form nerves and tracts in the spinal cord. Spinal cord is the most basic structure of the nervous system. A lot of lower animals, even if they don't have much of a brain, they do have at least a spinal cord. So I figured that's a good place to start. But now we're going to get a little more formal and talk about the overall structure, the organization of the nervous system. So here we go. Nervous system, first of all, is your body's electrical system. Nerve impulses are electrical impulses. They're caused by ions. Remember, ions are charged atoms, all right? The main ones that we deal with in this course: sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium. They have electrical charges, positive or negative, and that's electricity. So it's movement of ions that causes electricity. The nervous system is your body's electrical system. Very broadly divided into two parts. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. So spinal cord is actually intelligent. A lot of people think of intelligence as being the brain. It is, but the spinal cord is intelligent too. Remember the reflex arcs? That happened just to the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord will often tell your brain what's going on, but the spinal cord can make decisions on its own. So central nervous system, the CNS, is the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, the PNS. The word peripheral means, the periphery, perimeter, peri, around. So this is the nervous system out in your extremities. It consists of nerves. So nerves leave the spinal cord and go out through the body. And then we did talk about this term before too, a ganglion, singular, or ganglia, plural. A cluster of neuron cell bodies in the PNS. We saw the dorsal root ganglion, right? So we're going to see other ganglia. So two broad divisions here: central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. I think it's important to keep in mind, and this is very, very simple, but nonetheless, it's important to, whenever you're thinking about the nervous system, remember that it always comes down to three basic functions, all right? And we saw this in the reflex arcs. Sensory input, integration, motor output. So in the reflex arc, we saw the sensory nerve synapsed with a interneuron, and then that synapse with a motor neuron. Look at the simple little diagram here. You're thirsty, you see a glass of water. You're thinking, damn, I'm thirsty. That will solve the problem. So the sensory input, right, you see the glass of water, you are experiencing thirst. That signal goes to your brain, and your brain says, hey, let's take advantage of this right here. So your brain sends a signal out, motor output to your, I really should say motor output. Diagram is funky. So motor output going to a muscle, and you can take a drink. That fixes the problem. But it always comes down to this, and really, in the practice of neurology, oftentimes that's one of the things neurologists have to figure out first is, where is the problem actually? Is this a sensory problem or is it a motor problem? And you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's hard to tell. So, but keep in mind, that's always what it comes down to. You're getting information about the outside world through your senses. That comes into your brain and your spinal cord. They figure things out, make decisions, and then they take actions by sending signals out to skeletal muscles or to glands and so on, so that you can deal with the situation. It's very simple, but it's actually very important to keep in mind that it's always those three parts. So sensory, afferent, remember, those impulses carry information from the body to the brain and the spinal cord. So they carry information from the periphery to the central nervous system, all right? That's sensory. Sensory impulses are ascending because, remember, they have to go up the spinal cord to the brain. Motor or efferent impulses carry information from the brain and spinal cord out to the body. So remember, those are descending because those are going down the spinal cord and out to the body, all right? The nerves that go out to your arm, when you want to move your arm, that impulse starts in your brain. So it has to go down the spinal cord and then out to your arm. So that's a descending impulse, all right? Sensory, afferent, ascending. Motor, efferent, descending. Now, sensory impulses from receptors in the skin, joints, and skeletal muscles travel via what are called somatic sensory neurons. Remember, the word soma means body. The soma was the body of the neuron, but that word gets used in many different contexts. So somatic here means to your body, and specifically body, we mean the skin and the skeletal muscles. So those are your somatic sensory neurons bringing information in from receptors in the skin, the joints, and the muscles. Now, on the other hand, receptors from internal organs and smooth muscles travel via what are called visceral sensory neurons. So the word viscera means organ. Like if you watch Game of Thrones, somebody takes a sword, splits somebody down the middle, they eviscerate them. It means their guts come out. So this is an important distinction. There are basically two completely different sensory pathways in the body. One is from your skin and joints and skeletal muscles. The other pathway is from your internal organs. And those are different branches or divisions of the nervous system. So the visceral sensory stuff we're really not going to deal with very much until the fourth part of the class. So we have sensory impulses and then motor impulses. So motor, again, going out to the body. So to skeletal muscles, the impulses travel via what are called somatic motor neurons. So somatic sensory neurons take information from the skin, joints, and muscles into your central nervous system. And then motor impulses go out to your skeletal muscles. Those travel along somatic motor neurons. These are voluntary. Remember, for the most part, your skeletal muscles are under voluntary control. You can choose when to move them. Now, in contrast, internal organs and smooth muscles, those motor impulses travel via the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, autonomic nervous system. Those are autonomic motor neurons. And those, for the most part, are involuntary. I mean, prove me wrong. Right now, go ahead, make your heart stop. Yeah, no, you can't do it. And the good thing too, because if you could do it, you'd get drunk and you'd bet somebody and you'd kill yourself by stopping your heart just to win, $5. But whatever. Go ahead, make your gallbladder secrete some bile. No, you can't do things like that. So autonomic motor neurons, those are involuntary. Those are going to your viscera again. So two big divisions here, somatic versus visceral and autonomic. Somatic deals with skin and skeletal muscles. The autonomic and the visceral deal with internal organs. And again, this third part of the class, we're dealing mostly with the somatic sensory neurons and somatic motor neurons. We won't really deal with the visceral sensory stuff and the autonomic motor neurons until the fourth section of the class. Here you see then the motor part of the ANS itself has two separate divisions. They are called the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, and parasympathetic, the rest and digest. So notice that diagram there, very good. Summarizes everything we're talking about. Got the central nervous system, which is communicating with peripheral. Peripheral then has the sensory, the efferent, and the motor. The sensory, the afferent, motor, the efferent. And notice, just like we said, the efferent, all right, so we've got the afferent, rather, the sensory, somatic and visceral sensory nerve fibers coming in. Somatic, again, from the skin, visceral from internal organs. And then motor is outgoing. But here we have the somatic nervous system, you can see in the bottom right, that's going out to skeletal muscles, that's under voluntary control. Whereas the autonomic, the involuntary stuff, that's going to your internal organs, your viscera. And it is composed of these two separate divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic gets the nickname fight or flight because the sympathetic nervous system is basically the nervous system of crisis. It's trying to prepare you for some sort of crisis. You either need to fight back, you need to run, you need to get the hell out of there, you need to do something to survive. This is survival-oriented stuff. And then once you have survived, then you can relax, and then the parasympathetic kind of takes over. That's the rest and digest part, all right? So the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, that we're saving that for the fourth section of the class. That is so important in the healthcare professions. That's basically the nervous system of healthcare right there. So, but we cover the basic structure now. We just don't go into the details until the fourth section of the class. So again, here's a great diagram, and you should spend time. You should spend 10 minutes or so looking this over. The sensory, the afferent, versus the motor, the efferent. Sensory, on the somatic side, we have the touch, pain, pressure, vibration, all the stuff coming from the skin, plus some special senses as well. Visceral, these are the things coming from the inside of your body. The nausea, hunger, all right, these internal sensations, all right. And then on the motor side, again, somatic is going to skeletal muscles, autonomic is going to smooth muscle, it's going to heart muscle, it's going to internal organs, and there are two different divisions. One to get you ready for the crisis, the other one to recover after the crisis is over. So just remind yourself of all the parts of the neuron. We covered this already when we did the spinal cord PowerPoint, but just remember dendrites, those are for input. Then we have the cell body or soma, all right. Then we have the axon hillock, that's where all the impulses coming in from the dendrites are summed up and a decision is made. Axon hillock, also called the trigger zone. Then we have the axon, the output, where the action potential goes. Notice it's covered with myelin sheaths. And then we get down all the way to the end and we have the axon terminals. Those are going to make synapses, and we're going to release neurotransmitters. So let's take a look and see that there are, in fact, some different kinds of synapses, and this diagram shows all three. So first of all, notice the red one there. Oh, let's see. No, I don't want to do the red one first. Let's go to the right. Let's do that sort of teal colored one. Notice we have axon terminals making synapses with dendrites. So the axon is synapsing with the dendrites. So what do we call that? We call that an axodendritic synapse. How easy is that? It says what it is. Then now look at the red one. We have axons, the axon terminals, releasing neurotransmitters onto the soma. So we call that an axosomatic synapse. And then the blue one, notice we can actually have axons release neurotransmitters, axon terminals, onto the axon hillock itself, or to the first segment there of the axon. So we call those axoaxonic. That's a synapse between an axon and an axon, all right? Easy terms, just we need to be able to talk about them. And now I have to admit to you that I've sort of lied to you. All the neurons we've been looking at so far were just one of three basic kinds of neurons. But they were the most common by far. The neuron that we've looked at so far makes up 90% or whatever of all the neurons in your body. So let's talk about that, a multipolar neuron. Why is it called multipolar? Because there's lots of dendrites, all right, lots of poles, but there's only one axon, all right, lots of dendrites, one axon. Most of the neurons in your central nervous system are multipolar. And again, overall, of all the neurons in your body, 90% or whatever are multipolar neurons. That's the most common kind. That's why we looked at that one first. Then bipolar. Why is it called bipolar? Not because it's manic depressive or anything like that. Bipolar because it has two poles. So notice you see the cell body. The dendrites come off of one side of the cell body and the axon is on the other. Now notice there's still lots of dendrites, aren't there? But there's only one connection to the cell body. Do you see how that's different than the multipolar? On the multipolar, all those individual dendrites connect directly to the soma, whereas here, there's only one pole, and then all the dendrites branch off of that. Bipolar neurons are not common at all in the nervous system. They, by the way, have one dendrite, one axon. 1 and 1 is 2, bipolar. They're found in many special sense organs. So we'll see them in the eye, we'll see them in the ear. That's where we have bipolar neurons. So again, these are not common, but they're important for your special senses. And finally, unipolar. These are sometimes called pseudo-unipolar because, well, just it's an argument that people like to get into. I'm not going to do it. Either one's fine with me. They have only one process. So look at the cell body, all right? There's only one thing coming off the cell body. You can't really call it either an axon or a dendrite. It's just one thing. But notice that it branches immediately. One side ends up having axons and axon terminals. The other side ends up having dendrites on it. All right, so that's a unipolar neuron. Only one process, but it still ends up having axons and dendrites. All right. This is really rare. The only place we see this are the somatosensory neurons, and those are in the ganglia of the cranial and spinal nerves. So the dorsal root ganglion, remember? This is the type of neuron that has its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. So unipolar neurons are the sensory neurons for the somatic sensory impulses. For all of your skin senses, pain, stretch, temperature, itch, pressure. And the cell body, again, is in the dorsal gray horn. All right, the dendrites are out in your skin, and then those axon terminals are in the spinal cord. All right, it's synapsing, therefore they're running through the dorsal horn and synapsing with interneurons there in the gray matter of the spinal cord. So 3 kinds of neurons, not hard to sort out. Again, multipolar by far the most common, but I do want you to know what the bipolar and unipolar look like and where they're found, okay? Now, this is just an interesting slide because it shows that the nervous system is very highly conserved throughout the animal kingdom. So coelenterids, those are like jellyfish and stuff. You got insects there. The heart, an insect heart really doesn't look at all like your heart. Very, very different. Insect heart looks kind of like a toilet paper tube. It doesn't have separate chambers. It just kind of goes boom, and just like moves fluid around. So lots of other parts of animals are very, very different from one another, but nerves are basically the same throughout the entire animal kingdom. I mean, look at bugs and jellyfish, and I mean all the different kinds of animals. Birds, mammals, reptiles. Everybody has basically the same kind of neuron structure. All right, neurons are very highly conserved, and that's why, for example, like lots of pesticides, things that kill bugs can kill people as well. Because if it works on a bug's nervous system, it's probably going to work on your nervous system also. So, something to keep in mind. Nervous system, and that's why, just going back to the fact that, venomous snakes, like mambas. You get bitten by a mamba, you're going to die unless you get anti-venom. You might think, well, why mambas don't prey on people? Why would their venom be so lethal? Well, because our nervous system is basically the same as the nervous system of the rodents and things that they eat. And the nervous system is really the same throughout almost all animals, and that has a lot of consequences. So let's take a look right here. Here we see neuron A, B, and C in a diagram. I want to know neuron A is what type of neuron, and it's making mostly what kinds of synapses. Is it multipolar, bipolar, or unipolar? And are the synapses axoaxonic, axodendritic, or axosomatic? Take a look. Neuron A, what type is the neuron, and what kinds of synapses? Yeah, notice it's a unipolar neuron. It has only one process, and it's making synapses with the dendrites of that interneuron. So it's unipolar and axodendritic. Now let's talk about neuron C. What type of neuron is neuron C? Is it bipolar, multipolar, or unipolar? And is it a sensory neuron or is it a motor neuron? So take a close look. All right. First, what kind of neuron is it? And then figure out, is this a sensory or a motor? It's going to a skeletal muscle, isn't it? Yeah, this is going to be a multipolar somatic motor neuron. All right? So these things aren't hard to figure out. Just take a look and you can do it.